He can hear Stephen Mace calling for him. The voice is somewhere out in the smoke, 30 yards away, maybe less, and it's not strong. It's the voice of a man who has already lost too much blood, who is dragging himself through dirt with his elbows because his legs no longer work. And in between the crack of incoming rounds and the thump of RPGs hitting the earth, that voice is the only thing Ty Carter is fixed on. The outpost is burning. Taliban fighters are inside the wire. 8 Americans will not survive the day. And Ty Carter, a cavalry scout from Spokane, Washington, wounded himself, pinned in a shot-up Humvee on the southern edge of the compound, is about to step outside that Humvee one more time and walk straight toward the fire. This is October 3rd, 2009. This is the Battle of Kamdesh, and this is the story of the soldier who refused to let his man die in the dirt. To understand what happened at Combat Outpost Keating, you have to understand where it was. Imagine the worst possible place to build a military base. Now make it worse. Camp Keating sat at the bottom of a narrow valley in Nuristan province in northeastern Afghanistan, just a handful of miles from the Pakistani border. 3 mountain ridgelines pressed in from every direction, rising steeply to heights of several thousand feet above the outpost floor. The soldiers stationed there had a name for it, the Fishbowl, because that's exactly what it was. You were at the bottom, in the open, and everything above you was high ground that the enemy owned. The outpost had been established in 2006 as part of a broader effort to cut Taliban supply lines running out of Pakistan and to build relationships with the villages of Kamdesh district. It was named after First Lieutenant Ben Keating, a young officer who died in a vehicle accident on a mountain road in November of that year. A man who had worked hard to earn the trust of local village elders, and whose death left a hole in that effort that was never really filled. By 2009, Camp Keating was widely understood to be a strategic failure. The counterinsurgency mission had stalled. Resupply by ground was almost impossible. The roads were too exposed, too dangerous. Helicopter flights had come in on moonless nights, in near total darkness, to reduce the chance of being shot down. The troops were eating MREs most of the time, or whatever food packages came from home, because hot meals were a luxury. The soldiers patrolling those ridgelines burned more calories than they could take in. The stress never let up. Through the first 9 months of 2009, the outpost had been hit by 212 separate attacks. Sniper fire, mortars, RPGs, an almost daily reminder that the enemy was watching from above, testing responses, learning routines, and getting ready for something bigger. By the fall of 2009, the U.S. military had already approved a plan to close Camp Keating. General Stanley McChrystal, the top commander in Afghanistan at the time, was pulling troops back from isolated outposts like this one and concentrating them in more populated areas. The closure had been scheduled for August. It got delayed, lack of helicopters, competing priorities. And so on October 3rd, the men of Bravo Troop were still there, still in the Fishbowl. Ty Carter was born in Spokane, Washington in January 1980. His family moved to California's Bay Area when he was a toddler, returned to Spokane in 1991, and that is where he grew up, North Central High School, quiet, good at biology and art, not particularly thinking about the military until he needed a reason to avoid college. He enlisted in the Marine Corps in October of 1998, trained as a combat engineer, served in Okinawa as an intelligence clerk, and showed enough natural talent with a rifle that the Corps sent him to primary marksmanship instructor school. He served and was honorably discharged in October 2002 after 4 years. For a few years after that, Carter lived a civilian life, community college, a marriage, a daughter. But by 2008, something pulled him back. He re-enlisted in the Army and went to Fort Knox to train as a cavalry scout. A scout's job is reconnaissance and surveillance. You're supposed to find the fight before the fight finds you. After training, Carter was assigned to Bravo Troop, 3rd Squadron, 61st Cavalry Regiment, 4th Brigade Combat Team, 4th Infantry Division, based at Fort Carson, Colorado. The unit's name was Black Knight Troop. In May of 2009, they deployed to Afghanistan. Not long after arriving in country, Carter and the rest of Bravo Troop were sent to the most remote, most exposed piece of real estate in the province. They went to Cape Keating. In the early hours of October 3rd, something changed in the village of Kamdesh. At around 3 in the morning, Taliban-backed fighters began moving through the streets, telling residents to leave. By the time the first light touched the ridgelines, the village was emptying. At 5:53 in the morning, an Afghan interpreter came to the troop command post with urgent news. The police chief in the nearby village of Ermel had sent a warning personally. Enemy fighters were in the area, and they were coming. The intelligence was noted. The men at their guard posts settled in and watched the slopes. 6 o'clock came, and then it all happened at once. More than 300 Taliban fighters opened fire from the high ground surrounding Cape Keating on all 4 sides simultaneously. They hit the outpost with B-10 recoilless rifles, Soviet-era anti-armor weapons capable of punching through walls. They hit it with DSHK heavy machine guns, the kind designed to bring down aircraft, now being walked across a small outpost packed with Americans. They hit it with rocket-propelled grenades, mortars, and small arms fire from hundreds of rifles. The assault was coordinated, rehearsed, and built around intimate knowledge of the outpost layout, where the most powerful weapons are, where the guard positions sat, which corners were least defended. Their first target was the 120mm mortar pit, the heaviest weapon the Americans had. They put it out of action almost immediately. Within 2 minutes of the first shots, Private First Class Kevin Thompson was dead, shot in the face at the northern mortar position. He was 21 years old. The Afghan National Army soldiers who shared the outpost began to collapse. 10 to 15 of them ran through the wire and fled. The rest abandoned their posts, and a handful even handed their weapons to Taliban fighters as they ran. The outpost, already outnumbered and surrounded, suddenly had open gaps in its perimeter. 53 American soldiers had 13 hours to stop 300 enemy fighters from overrunning and destroying them completely. Ty Carter was asleep when it started. The explosions brought him to his feet. Boots, Kevlar, rifle, and out the door. His assignment was to get to the southern battle position. 2 fortified Humvees on the southern edge of the compound that served as key defensive anchor. The position was low on ammunition, and his path to it crossed 100 meters of open ground being swept by enemy fire. He ran it anyway. He reached the position, dropped the ammunition, and ran back for more. Then he ran the gauntlet a 3rd time to bring gun oil for a machine gun that was starting to foul. 3 crossings of that 100-meter stretch, with rounds hitting around him every step of the way. By the time Carter reached the battle position for the last time, Sergeant Justin Gallegos had already been killed in the open ground nearby, shot down while trying to reach a wounded man. Several others were pinned down or injured. Carter took up a position inside one of the Humvees alongside Sergeant Brad Larson, and the 2 of them set up with everything they had and started fighting. For the next hour and a half, Carter and Larson held the southern battle position together. 2 soldiers and whatever ammunition they could scrape together, fighting off a force pressing hard to get through. The Humvee took hits. The windows were shot out. RPGs detonated close enough to shake the vehicle and fill it with smoke and dust. Carter fired his M4 with discipline, picking targets, making every round count. When they realized the drum magazine on their machine gun was nearly empty, only about 50 rounds left, Carter suggested they break down the belt ammunition and feed it through their M4s instead, giving both of them workable loads for their rifles. They did it, and it bought them more time. With those rounds, Carter killed a 2-man RPG team setting up to hit their position, and took out 2 additional fighters in the Ermel police station building across the way. The southern flank held. The enemy didn't break through. But they were wounded, running low on ammunition, and cut off from the rest of the troop. Their radios were down, and for all they knew, the rest of Cape Keating had already fallen. They were operating blind, fighting on faith. And somewhere out in the smoke and debris between their Humvee and the open ground beyond, there was a voice still calling for help. Specialist Stephen Mace was a 21-year-old from Lovettsville, Virginia. He had been at the southern battle position when the attack started, pulling guard duty alongside Sergeant Larson. When the position became untenable and the soldiers had to move, Mace had gone down in the open ground. His legs had been torn apart by RPG shrapnel. He couldn't walk, couldn't run. He was dragging himself on his elbows through dirt and rocks, calling out to anyone who might hear him. Carter could see him from the passenger seat of the Humvee, about 30 yards away, exposed, moving with agonizing slowness. The ground between them was being swept by fire. Sergeant Gallegos had already been killed trying to reach him. Carter knew exactly what he was looking at. He turned to Larson and said he wanted to try. Larson said no, it was too dangerous. Carter pushed back. Mace would die if they left him there. Larson relented, but only if Carter could prove he could survive outside the Humvee first. Carter had already done it. Earlier in the fight, he had crawled under fire to a disabled truck nearby and retrieved an M249 and more ammunition. That was the proof. Larson gave his approval. Carter got out, stayed low, and made it to Mace. He assessed the wounds, devastating injuries to both legs, applied tourniquets, and talked to Mace to keep him conscious and focused. Then came the problem. He couldn't carry a man and manage his rifle at the same time. He went back to the Humvee, explained to Larson what they would do next. Larson would exit the vehicle and provide covering fire. Carter would go back to Mace, unarmed, pick him up, and carry him in. That's exactly what happened. Larson stepped out and opened fire. Carter went back to Mace, bent down, picked him up, all of him, both ruined legs and everything else, cradled him in his arms and started walking. Through the bullets, across the open ground, back to the Humvee. He put Mace in the front passenger seat and went back to the fight. The battle lasted 13 hours in total. Through the rest of the morning and into the afternoon, Carter and Larson continued to hold their position. As ammunition dwindled, they shifted to single, carefully aimed shots. No more suppressive fire, just precision. Every round had to matter. On the other side of the compound, Staff Sergeant Clint Romasha was leading a counterattack, pushing Taliban fighters who had broken through the wire back out of the outpost, organizing the recovery of fallen soldiers under sustained fire. American aircraft worked the ridge lines, hammering the high ground positions the Taliban were firing from. Slowly, through hours of sustained fighting, the assault began to break apart. A quick reaction force that had been inserted onto observation post Frishy hiked down the switchback trail under enemy fire and linked up with the defenders as the battle was widening down. By around 7 in the evening, it was over. 8 Americans were dead. More than 24 were wounded. The Taliban had suffered somewhere between 150 and 200 killed and wounded. The outpost itself was partially overrun, heavily damaged, and burning in several places. Within days, the army evacuated it, and a B-1 bomber destroyed what remained so none of it could fall into enemy hands. Stephen Mace was flown out of Forward Operating Base Bostic and then on to Bagram Airfield. He was alive when he arrived. He died in surgery later that day. He was 21 years old. The 8 soldiers killed at Combat Keating on October 3, 2009 were Staff Sergeant Justin T. Gallegos of Tucson, Arizona, Sergeant Christopher T. Griffin of Kinchelo, Michigan, Sergeant Joshua M. Hart of Applegate, California, Sergeant Joshua J. Kirk of South Portland, Maine, Specialist Stephen L. Mace of Lovettsville, Virginia, Staff Sergeant Vernon W. Martin of Savannah, Georgia, Michael P. Scusa of Villas, New Jersey, and Private First Class Kevin C. Thompson of Reno, Nevada. They were between 21 and 30 years old. At the Medal of Honor ceremony years later, President Obama read their names aloud before he said anything else. That is the right order of things. On February 11, 2013, President Barack Obama presented the Medal of Honor to former Staff Sergeant Clinton Romasha for his actions at Combat Keating, leading the counterattack, organizing the recovery of the fallen, holding the compound together under fire. 6 months later, on August 26, 2013, Obama placed the Medal of Honor around the neck of Staff Sergeant Ty Carter in the East Room of the White House. That made 2 living Medal of Honor recipients from the same single battle, the first time that had happened since the Vietnam War. It's a distinction that speaks directly to the scale of what the men of Bravo Troop faced that day. 1 battle, 13 hours, 2 Medals of Honor, 9 Silver Stars, 18 Bronze Stars for Valor, 27 Purple Hearts, 37 Army Commendation Medals with Valor devices. Outnumbered nearly 6-1. At the ceremony, Obama asked the soldiers of the 61st Cavalry to stand and be recognized alongside the families of the 8 fallen. Then he repeated what Carter had told him earlier that day. This award is not mine alone. The battle was one team in one fight. Everyone did what they could to keep each other alive. Carter stayed in the Army for 5 more years. He deployed to Afghanistan a second time in 2012, returning to the country that had nearly killed him. He kept doing the job, but the battle had not left him. During the fighting on October 3rd, an explosion had destroyed the hearing in his left ear. The physical damage was permanent, and there was damage that couldn't be seen on a scan or measured at a medical appointment. Carter came home with post-traumatic stress. He was open about that, more open than most veterans were comfortable being at the time. He prefers not to call it PTSD. He calls it PTS, post-traumatic stress, without the word disorder. His reasoning is deliberate. It's not a disorder, he says. It's a response. It's what happens inside a human being who has witnessed what he witnessed. He's spent years since leaving the Army working to remove the stigma, giving speeches, meeting with veterans, chipping away at the culture of silence that costs lives every year. Vanessa Adelson, Stephen Mace's mother, attended the Medal of Honor ceremony at the White House. Her son had died in surgery, but he had not died alone, and he had not died in the dirt. Because of what Carter did that day, Mace had been brought back to consciousness. He had been speaking. He had been carried out of that compound and taken into surgery. The only one of the 8 fallen soldiers who made it that far. She said her gratitude was beyond words. Obama repeated what she told him. The image to hold on to from that day is Ty Carter bending down, picking Stephen Mace up, cradling him, carrying him through the bullets, getting him back. Because of that, she said, her son did not die in the dirt. He died at peace. Ty Carter left the Army as a staff sergeant in September of 2014. He had served 2 branches over nearly 16 years, from a Marine in Okinawa to a cavalry scout in one of the most violent valleys in Afghanistan. He could have gone quiet about all of it. A lot of men in his position chose that. Instead, he kept talking, because it helped him, and because he believed the men who died at Keating deserved to have their story told. By telling the story, he chips away at the survivor's guilt. He knows what the soldiers around him did that day to keep each other alive, and he feels the weight of being the one who made it through. Years later, in the still of some early morning, Ty Carter still hears the voice, 30 yards away, in the smoke, calling for him. Every time he tells that story, he's giving something back to the men who didn't come home, making sure the world knows they were there, they fought, and they deserve better than the Fishbowl. I'm Dave. Thanks for watching. If this kind of history matters to you, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me whose story you think I should cover next. I'll see you in the next one.
He's a Dave, dude. Dave's got to stick together, you know what I mean?